What's going on, guys? Today I'm going to be talking about one of my favorite things in all of One Piece, the 5 major factions that Dofi laid out for us with his speech while he was on his way to Impel Down. And more specifically, I'm going to be ranking them in terms of the power that I think that they wield. If they were to go up against one another, who would win in an all-out battle? In case you are not completely familiar with what I am talking about right now, I'm talking about the factions, the Yonkos, the Warlords, the Worst Generation, the World Government or the Navy, and the Revolutionary Army. And just to set up a few rules for this ranking video, first of all, the Yonko will be actually an entire group. It's not going to be like an individual Yonko's army. I know that's going to make them obviously completely overpowered. It's really kind of going to scratch the top of this debate, but I think it just makes a lot more sense to do it that way, since every other faction is going to be handled the same way, despite the fact that most of them are also not actually aligned. The Revolutionary Army and the World Government or Navy are one big thing where they all work together, but the other 3 are all just individuals working for themselves, and they just happen to be considered a part of the same group. So I will be treating the Yonko the same way as the Warlords and the Worst Generation. Also, with that being said, that means that Blackbeard will not be considered a part of the Worst Generation in this, since he is also a Yonko. I will just put him in the Yonko category. So I guess I could have just said supernovas to simplify things, but I think that Worst Generation sounds a lot cooler, so I tried to say that as much as possible. And also, just one more very specific rule: if this wasn't obvious, then the Warlords will not be factoring into the power sum of the Navy, because that just doesn't really make any sense. So yeah, even though, you know, the Warlords can be called upon for the Navy to use in certain situations, like the War of the Best, I'm not going to account for them in the Navy's power. Oh yeah, and also kind of important, even though Dofi has been taken down, I'm still going to be factoring him into the Warlord's power levels. He's the only Warlord I'm going to be doing that for, so like no Crocodile is going to be involved in this, but since, you know, he's the only one that's actually been taken down in the New World so far, and it's really happened quite recently, I'm still going to factor him in, but not any of the others that have been taken down. And so coming in at number 5, the one I consider to be the weakest of the 5 great factions, I have the Revolutionary Army. Although I think they are a serious force to be reckoned with, they are going to cause a lot of damage to the world government in the future. I think that they are mainly doing this through like covert operations. Although they do have some powerful members, I do think they mainly are going to do their thing without actually using complete force. I mean, just look at the way that both Koala and, even more importantly, Sabo were acting in Dressrosa. They were being very stealthy. Sabo didn't want to be seen for the longest time, despite being a monstrosity of pure power, one of the strongest characters we've seen in the series up until this point. Kuma's gone now, so he is not factored into this in the slightest. So the big 3 power players we have here are Dragon, Sabo, and Ivankov. With Ivankov, it's really hard for me to actually gauge his power because he didn't do so much in the War of the Best. If anything, he was kind of playing a supportish role, but he has been compared to the other officers such as Kuma and Sabo, so I like to think he is around that level. Again, Sabo speaks for himself. He's a monstrosity of pure power, and Dragon is someone I could consider to be possibly the strongest character in the series at this moment. I wouldn't be surprised in the slice if that was the case. I wouldn't be surprised if nobody but the Yonko could compare to him. But even with that being said, at least at this point in the story where we haven't been introduced to too many characters, I don't think that these guys are going to be enough. I don't think Dragon is enough to shift it really too far into their favor against any of the other factions. Again, Sabo and Ivankov are got to be really powerful too, but I mean, Dragon's going to be canceled out just by the Warlords from Mihawk, and I mean, Sabo, Dofi, like there's a cancel, and Weevil could also be assumed to be pretty powerful, and then we have the rest of the Warlords. We haven't even gotten to Hancock at that point, so I think the Revolutionary Army has to be the weakest, at least at this point in the story, where we do not know too much about them. Maybe in the future, maybe if they do appear at Reverie, we'll see a lot more power players that they have, but at this point, I'm putting them at number 5. And so then, if that last sentiment wasn't a hint as to who my number 4 is, it is in fact the Warlords. So the Revolutionaries and the Warlords are what I actually think are the closest on this list. I think everything else is a pretty clear hierarchy of power. Maybe 4 and 3 could be debated a little, but everything after that is pretty straightforward. It was 4 and 5 that I really had a lot of trouble with. I think that they're extremely close, but I think, like I was kind of just explaining, at least in the case of the Warlords and the Revolutionaries, they have almost perfect matchups which cancel each other out, and then the Warlords just have a little bit more from what we've seen. So, once again, just to explain my thought process real quickly, just looking at each faction's power levels from top to bottom, canceling each other out, we have Dragon and Mihawk. I think that from what we know right now, they're probably around the same level. They pretty much cancel each other out. Then we could have maybe some Dofi and Sabo action. I think that that is a pretty reasonable comparison at this point. I don't think Kuma is really taken into this consideration that much because I think he's extremely weak in his robot form for the most part. Could be totally wrong on that, but from what we've seen so far, I think that that is the case. And we don't really know how powerful Weevil is, but I like to think he is around the Dofi level. I think that's reasonable based on what we've seen so far. And I think that Ivankov is right around there too, right around the Sabo and Kumo level. So it's fair to say for me that they would also cancel each other out. And then, like I said, we haven't even gotten to Hancock at that point, and maybe even Buggy. I think Buggy could be an important factor here. And now the obvious thing that people are going to be thinking as well, okay, you're only taking the commanders of the Revolutionary Army into account here. But no, I understand. There are a lot of people we don't know about. There's even Koala and Hack. They seem to be worth something at the very least. Even Inazuma seems kind of cool. He kind of was like buddies with Ivankov, so maybe he is pretty decent. There's a lot of people in the Revolutionary we don't know about, even maybe the lower class people. Maybe they are actually worth something. But again, we just don't know about them at this point, and I don't really want to make any assumptions because I could see the lower part of the Revolutionary Army being complete fodder. And even if they're not, even if they are worth something, for one thing, we do have Hancock, also a user of Conqueror's Haki, so that could be extremely useful for taking down lower tier people, and she's just powerful on her own as well. And then for dealing with lower level people, we have Buggy and crew. Buggy isn't really worth so much himself at this point, at least, but he pretty much has this thing where he's amassing a ridiculous army of decently powerful people. It all started in the War of the Best, and I'm guessing it's only gotten more insane from that point on. He's actually been shown to be kind of working in the underworld, so I'm sure his army is only getting stronger. And yeah, I think that it really does kind of have to at least cancel out the lower tier, and then we have Hancock at the least to put the Warlords just above the Revolutionary Army. And now we have arrived at number 3, and I know I was just talking about how I think that only really 4 and 5 were really that debatable, and then maybe even 4 and 3. But you know what? I've taken a little time to actually think about the worst generation. I actually just am looking at all their pictures right now, and something comes to mind. Something makes me think that they actually might really be able to contest the number 2 spot as well. While I am pretty confident at putting them at number 3, which is why I'm doing so, I do think it actually is pretty close. I think that they are very strong, and they're actually probably closer to the number 2 spot than the number 4. I don't think you're going to be too surprised when I say that I'm talking about the worst generation, minus Blackbeard if you didn't hear me say in the beginning of the video, because no one ever listens to the rules I set up for these ranking videos. But yeah, the worst generation minus Blackbeard is my number 3 spot. But I think that they are extremely powerful as a group. I initially was going to be going in here and kind of comparing them to the Warlords because I think that they were much closer to that originally. Now I'm thinking that they really need to be compared to the number 2 spot, which I guess I might as well just say now for the sake of comparison is going to be, of course, you have to know that it's this, the Navy. In fact, let's get this ranking video really weird, okay? Let's just call this the number like 2 and 3 spot. I think it's extremely debatable. I can't really talk about number 3 without talking about number 2, so yes, number 2 is the Navy and number 3 is the worst generation. Let's get into a comparison here. So what really got me thinking that this is going to be a very close battle is, well, so there is a lot of idea that the Supernovas are going to team up to take down Kaido together. This is also very surprising to some people, but this is something I've heard a lot about, and I could see it being extremely possible, especially with all the different Supernovas supernovas currently involved with Kaido at this point. So with that being said, that with their combined power, and maybe not even all of them, just maybe more than half of them combined, trying to take down what I consider to be possibly the strongest Yonko, maybe not as a crew, but at least by himself, they have to be pretty powerful. So what I'm saying here is that, at least in my experiences so far, most people believe that at least half of them, maybe all of them, as a group would be able to take down Kaido and crew. So, with that being said, just remember that Whitebeard, another Yonko, one of Kaido's colleagues you could say, went to Marineford and not just faced off against the Navy, but also the Warlords as well. Now, granted, they did not really take that much of an active role. Mihawk really didn't do anything, and that's extremely important. But still, it was at least the Navy, all the admirals, Sengoku, who again didn't really participate too much, but not the point. Garp was there, didn't participate too much, but not the fucking point. They did have some warlords there to make up for it who actually were participating, so I would say it almost evens out. That was pretty much the full force of the Navy, and Whitebeard was almost able to win that war. In fact, realistically, depending on what you consider winning the war, he actually did. He did in fact save Ace. Ace was rescued and then just committed suicide, so whatever. He kind of did fulfill his objective and just pretty much was willing to sacrifice himself for said objective, which then killed itself, but not the point. This is not going to be another one of my videos where I talk about how I dislike Ace. And even though Whitebeard probably had the strongest overall crew going into this war, it's still really important to note that a Yonko's crew was able to almost, if not actually, win a war against the full power of the Navy. So if the worst generation together is able to take down a Yonko, and a Yonko is able to pretty much either just barely lose or kind of defeat the Navy, there's a lot to be said about the worst generation. Even looking at it more specifically, an actual matchup between the worst generation and, let's just say, the Navy, maybe specifically the admirals, because those are quite important. We don't exactly know the full power of Fujitora, and we know absolutely nothing about Green Bull, but I like to think that they're at least somewhere near Kizaru's level. I remember one time my friend Shadow Torres asked me, do you think that the Monster Trio collectively could take down an admiral? To which I replied, the Monster Trio collectively against an admiral would absolutely annihilate the admiral. And then I also said, if it was just Luffy and Zoro, they would mid to low diffish an admiral, I guess. I'm really thinking probably mid-low. Believe me, I do understand how powerful an admiral really is. I'm not underestimating them in the slightest. But I mean, just looking at where Luffy is right now, he just stalemated Katakuri to say the least. And then what we have Zoro as well. Like, are you kidding me? I'm thinking Zoro is very, very, very close to Luffy's level. We have Luffy, who is pretty much just sub-admiral level, and then Zoro, who is pretty much just sub-admiral level. Putting them together, I think it really would be a pretty decisive fight. Now, I also do consider Luffy to be the strongest of the worst generation, and Zoro to kind of be flip-flopping between 2 and 3 with the Rouge, so those aren't exactly the best people to be using for this example, but I mean, that's just something that actually happened I thought was worth mentioning. And even with that, I don't think that there is this insane inequality in power levels throughout the worst generation. I think that there is a decent amount of power between maybe Luffy and whoever is the weakest, but it's not completely over the top. I think that they are capable of making, similar differences in the world by using their own strength. So pretty much I would say that, with any situation, if you take Luffy being number 1 and whoever is the 11th strongest together, they could probably very high diff an admiral. That seems very fair to me. Then, of course, you take the number 2, Zoro or Rouge, and whoever's the 10th, do the same thing. They could probably beat an admiral. You've got 5 of those and then just an extra guy left over. So you could take down 3 admirals, maybe a fleet admiral, and then maybe a Sengoku or Garp. And then you got the last guy to probably deal with the majority of the Navy by themselves, honestly. I mean, there's a lot of fodder in the Navy. Sure, they have been recruiting a lot of people, but I'm pretty sure that every single member of the worst generation could easily wipe the floor with any of the vice admirals besides Garp, obviously, but I mean, really, that's got to be it, right? Like, I'm thinking Smoker's got to be one of the higher end vice admirals at this point in the game. And I mean, Luffy embarrassed him. Like, he's nothing. He has nothing. So yes, while I think the Navy does take this victory almost for sure, because they do just have so many powerful members. We even did have that leftover Sengoku or Garp. I think it is very close. I think the Worst Generation would actually put up an amazing fight. The real things that just push it over the top for me are, again, the fact that we have a leftover Sengoku and Garp, and even though we have a leftover Worst Generation member, they're pretty much probably going to have to be dealing with all the new recruits into the Navy that Dofi was talking about. The military draft was supposed to be pretty drastic, so I think that leftover person would at the very least be dealing with that. And then there is the leftover monster. So, gotta give it to the Navy, but it would be a fantastic battle in my opinion. And lastly, the only faction left, the one that I think I'm gonna have to talk about the least here because it's so overwhelmingly powerful compared to the rest of them when working together. Obviously, it's got to be the Yonkos. I mean, no one can compare to that. Like, pretty much the entire basis of my argument between the Worst Generation and the Navy, the Worst Generation actually being able to put up a fight against the Navy, is the fact that the Worst Generation could likely take down a single Yonko out of there being 4. So, like, pretty much, like, what I'm saying here is that a Yonko, at least, maybe just Whitebeards, but it's at least worth something to take any Yonko's full force to Marineford, and they're going to be able to put up a pretty good fight. So in the same way that I was making the Luffy and Zoro versus Admiral comparison, we got 2 Yonkos, alright, and they're gonna wipe the floor with Marineford. Then you bring a third one, it's like, hello? I mean, what's even the point of this? Why is Marineford not just surrendering immediately? And then there's even a 4th one, okay? No one could come even close to matching the power of the 4 Yonko working together. I would probably suggest if the entire world of One Piece united to fight the 4 Yonkos all fighting together, they would not stand a chance. So again, don't think I need to talk about this one too much. I think everyone pretty much agrees here for the most part that is most likely the case, that they're just so over the top powerful when working together, and that's the reason that of course they're not working together. They're all working against each other, they're competing, they're trying to fight each other. They would like to take each other down. So yeah, that is my ranking of the 5 great factions of One Piece. We got the Revolutionaries, then the Warlords, then the Worst Generation, the Navy, and then the 4 Yonkos. If you enjoyed this video, remember to give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already. Remember to leave me a comment letting me know what you thought about this video, if you enjoyed it, if you like my ranking videos, if you thought that this one's rankings were completely ridiculous, maybe you think the Yonkos are the weakest of the 5 factions. If I saw a comment going anywhere even near that idea, I don't know if I'd be able to finish it, but you know, maybe that's what you think. Also, make sure to check out the link to my new Discord in the description. We're having a lot of fun in there. We have almost 100 members now. We got a lot of One Piece discussion pretty much every day going on. A lot of different channels for a lot of different things regarding One Piece. Even different anime if you're into that kind of stuff too. Gaming as well. Love to talk about that kind of stuff with you guys. I hope you guys have an excellent rest of your day, and I'll talk to you on Friday.